Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, honored guests and judges. I keep this pot on my desk at work to remind me of Malawi. Malawi is a country that's a couple countries north of South Africa, and I got the chance to travel there with my friend Matt about 2 years ago. Matt was working in Johannesburg at the time for about a year, and by the time I arrived, he'd already been invited to spend a week up in Malawi by a couple native Malawians named Kwacha and Kandi. They were nice enough to invite me along with him. Malawi was everything I expected Africa to be, but it still managed to shock me. Kwacha and Kandi lived in a neighborhood with dirt roads, cinder block houses, and no white people. They took us out in the countryside, and we saw people who were living in mud and grass huts, kids playing soccer with a ball that they had made out of plastic bags, and really more poverty than I've ever directly experienced in my life. The thing that I can't forget that I saw there was something that we came across on our way to the beach. Kwacha and Kandi lived about 2 hours away from this gorgeous lake, and about an hour into that drive, we came to a T in the road. On the other side of it, sitting in the red African dirt, was a group of 10 guys. Each guy had a massive pile of rocks next to him and a hammer. And we watched as every one of them took the rocks and beat them apart over and over again. So I asked Kandi, he was in the front right passenger seat, what are those men doing? And Kandi says, oh, that is their job. They make gravel and they take it to the market to sell, and that is how they eat. And I realized that I had absolutely nothing to say to that. And so instead of saying something, I made sure that before I left, I got some. So I brought back handmade Malawian gravel, and I keep it on my desk at work to remind me of what I saw. But that's what I expected to see. Isn't that what everyone expects to see when you go to Africa? Poverty and wilderness and huts? Think about what you see on TV. When was the last time you saw Africa portrayed as victorious in the media? Maybe you've seen a Kenyan runner win a marathon at the Olympics, or Angola's soccer team in the World Cup. But other than that, it's almost always images of poverty and war. Child soldiers, car tires on fire, people dying of HIV, AIDS, slums. You never see images of hope. What's depressing about that is that many of those images are accurate. And they're accurate not because we haven't tried to help, but because the West isn't very good at it. In a 2004 World Bank study, researchers found that from 1960 on, we've given about $650 billion worth of aid to sub-Saharan Africa. That's the lower half of the continent below the Sahara Desert that's the poorest. And the net result, during the same time period, from 1960 to the year 2000, the average per capita income actually went down. The number of people living in poverty increased. It's at the point now where if you added up the gross domestic product of every single one of those 48 countries that compose sub-Saharan Africa and put them together, that economy would be roughly the same in size as Michigan's. I was thinking about this on the way out of Malawi. Matt and I were on a 32-hour bus ride back to Johannesburg. On the trip, I got to sit next to this very nice, well-educated lady from Malawi. A few hours into it, we were driving through a very poor neighborhood, and I took a picture of it because I wanted to remember that. But then it reminded me of something. See, in Malawi, they hated when you take their picture. And we could never figure out why. We just wanted to remember what we'd seen, but to them, it was very different. So I asked her, why is it that so many people hate it when you take their picture? And she said, well, the only reason you take these pictures is to show people how poor we are, isn't it? And we don't like that. We don't want everyone to just think of us as poor. And she's absolutely right. That's the only thing I was getting out of it. My pictures, my rocks, it was all about the poverty there. And that's how we look at Africa, as this charity case, and we send aid accordingly. But it's exactly that attitude that causes people like James Shikwati, a Kenyan and an expert in economics, to beg the West to stop sending what he calls, quote, this awful aid that teaches Africans to be beggars. His favorite example of this is what happened in Kenya during the 90s. There was a large famine, and the West responded by dumping massive amounts of food aid. It temporarily averted the crisis, but it flooded the local agricultural markets with free food, and it destroyed them. Because what farmer can compete with free? So the people who needed to make money from what they were growing, a lot of them ended up going out of business. And the next year, the cycle of aid and famine virtually had to continue. The answer, therefore, is not just to send food when there is a famine, or troops when there's a disease, or drugs when there is a disease, or troops when there is a war. The guys making gravel on the side of the road in Malawi don't need us to send them more rocks. They need someone who understands their side. I originally got this rock to remind me of poverty. And yes, it does symbolize that. But it also means that at some point, a man found himself utterly destitute. And instead of laying down and dying, he found a hammer and got some rocks and started making gravel. And how many of us would have been that brave? Imagine what the same man would have done if instead of a hammer, he'd been given a computer, or even a decent education. That's the choice that we have. Every one of us can walk out of this room seeing past poverty to the person that it's engulfing. And out of our respect and admiration for their tenacity, send aid that empowers them to do what they would have done anyway. Or we can simply see empty mouths and swollen stomachs and continue sending aid that is awful. Madam Toastmaster.